This is getting bad, Marcia. You've got to learn to control your food expenses. You spent $385 just for food last month.
Robert, it really burns me up when you talk like this. Look who got a new bicycle. Look who got 2 new suits. And what about all that fancy new expensive exercise equipment you bought?
Only to save money, Marcia.
Only to save money, Marcia. Where have I heard that before?
You know that's true. The bicycle was for me to ride to work. I needed the suits, and they were 50% off. Well, and that expensive exercise equipment is only to save that monthly spa bill that we had.
Okay, I know that's true. But I hope you realize I saved the family money, too. Who put in a garden last year? I put in a garden, while you were off luxuriating on some business trip.
Not that again, Marcia. Come on.
Okay, I know it was really business, but I do save the family money. I try really hard, Robert. It was a great garden. Do you realize I go every week to the library to look at food ads in the newspaper?
Yeah, and I appreciate all that you do, too.
Well, I don't appreciate you insinuating that I'm some sort of glutton gourmet spending the family into the poorhouse.
Well, you do a tremendous job. It's just, well, this. We fell behind $190 in our debts last month alone.
Do you realize that's exactly the amount that it costs us to keep the girls in church school every month?
That's right, but we can't save there. What are you saying? Pull the kids out of church school?
I guess I'm saying, is it bankruptcy or a spendy school? Solvency is next to godliness, Robert, and if we're serious about what we always say about staying out of debt, maybe we ought to look at some alternatives.
Yeah. You really mean it, don't you?
Oh, I don't know what I mean, I guess. But there is such a thing as homeschool, like the Kavanaughs. They keep their kids out and they teach them at home.
I don't know. Let's just stop right there. I mean, neither you or I are trained teachers, and I'm not arrogant enough to think that, well, with all our other responsibilities and jobs, that we could ever compete with what Mrs. French has done for our children. I'd send the kids to a public school before I...
Okay, public school. Let's talk about public school. That's an alternative. You know, you and I could teach Bible classes during the morning worship that they have.
Yeah, and I could bring up evidences for creation and pre-existence of Christ, I guess.
We'd be saving $190 a month.
And the kids probably would be enjoying better facilities, too.
Expanded libraries, new science labs, Robert.
Yeah, and a secular environment, too.
Now, wait a minute, Robert. Don't be hasty. No school is perfect. Not even our little church school is perfect. And besides that, it's what the kids take with them to school that really decide if they're Christians or not.
Yeah, well, that's right. If the home is right, the children usually turn out right.
I've always believed that. And our public school has a really good, solid program. They have outstanding academics and new facilities, all free, no charge.
Well, you make a convincing case, Marcia, and we really need to do something to get our financial house in order.
As a parent.
But before we make this decision, let's get some other opinions. 11 o'clock, it's easy to think narrowly, and, well, we just can't afford to make a quick and easy decision that could affect our children for the rest of their lives.
Or longer. This could be a decision, a choice that we're making for eternity.
Yeah, could be.
Yes, please send them in.
Hi, Pastor.
Oh, Marcia, Robert, please go. Be seated.
Thank you. Say, Pastor, Marcia and I have been thinking about the education of our children, and quite frankly, we're concerned we simply can't afford the steep expense of church school any longer. We thought about teaching the children at home, but Marcia works part-time, so that's out of the question. Our only other alternative is the public school system.
I'm getting the impression that you two have really been struggling with this decision, and that's why you've come to see me. And I know that it's a major decision for any Christian family.
Pastor, we really believe that we can conscientiously put our children in public school. It's something that we've thought about very carefully, And we feel that we can still give them a Christian education.
You know, we have a fantastic public school system here, and we know the principal personally. He's a God-fearing man, and to the best of his ability, he tries to manage his school that way.
Sounds to me like we could use a few more good men like him in public life.
I guess what we have really come here to ask you is whether or not we're missing something. Is there some more information that we need before we make this crucial decision? Our girls are going to be very disappointed. They love that school. All of their friends are there. In fact, they go to church with those friends. But quite frankly, we think that we could use the tuition money in more beneficial ways.
Quality Christian education is expensive, but perhaps we need to sort out our values and our priorities, and of course recognize that it is a sacrifice.
Yeah. To put the question another way, I guess what we're asking is Christian education worth the expense, the sacrifice, and the debt? That, well, is there a simpler way, a more middle-class way, a way to save while giving our children every Christian opportunity?
Yes, there is. But before I answer your question directly, I'd like to show you a documentary on a video that I just received. It's a documentary study of Christian and public education, a comparison of the two. Not a very long video, and I think it will answer some of your own questions that you're raising.
Sounds like exactly what we need to see and hear.
Great. I'll get things set up and I'll put it in the machine and we'll watch it together. All right. Is that coming through all right?
Yes.
For the rugged pioneers who settled the vast North American continent, the syllables education rang with a mystical, almost a magical tone. Farmers, miners, teamsters, frontier businessmen, they all dreamed of giving their children the grandest gift they could imagine, a decent education. Not college, not even high school, but the basics for growth, for understanding, for wise decisions. In those days, no one spoke lightly of education, and the stiff, starched ways of the schoolmaster sometimes went just a bit too far. Teaching was a serious business, and his every gesture while in the classroom brought home the point. And woe to the one who failed through sloth or indifference. Lessons required precise memory work and a disciplined study plan, for these were the Americans of the future, the guardians and defenders of democracy. The nation had now passed its 100th birthday. A new century was on the horizon, and education was the key to a boundless tomorrow. The age of science had dawned, and scientific education became the goal of every self-respecting school board in the nation. Such prominent educators as John Dewey, the founder of the University of Chicago, lent his influence to the movement. And it was his avowed purpose to pull myth, folklore, and yes, religion too, from the classroom. America's future lay in science and in human-oriented thinking, he said. The young should be free to establish their own values, to make their own choices as to right and wrong, for this was the new scientific way. Nothing, it seems, could stand in the face of this enthusiasm for change in the school system. Not only the subjects taught, but the system itself was reorganized. The school system became a national network centered in Washington, D.C. National standards were set. All was done democratically, at least on paper. Every virtue of the American way seemed to be wrapped up in this grand scheme. And yet some voices dared speak out against this new education. They pointed out dangers in the system. They saw that in these schools, there were no solid differences between right and wrong. Morality had its base not on eternal truth, but on so-called enlightened thinking. And of course, the ideas of evolutionist Charles Darwin soon found their way into the system. And Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, a believer in this new education, wrote of his feelings, "I see no reason for attributing to man a significant difference in kind from that which belongs to a baboon or a grain of sand. No difference from an ape, a cow, a tree, or a mote of sand. In other words, young humans were to be manipulated and shaped to fit the whim of whoever happened to be in charge at the moment. For if man had no dignity nor mission of his own, he was but a pawn in the clutches of the powerful. With his usual wit, Justice Holmes was forced to admit the results of such thinking. Truth is the majority vote of that nation that could lick all the others. Despite the nation's content with the American way of learning, there were those who saw where this thinking might lead young minds. One of those was Ellen White, a woman of middle years and by the standards of the day uneducated. And yet, without scientific credentials, she spoke out against what she saw happening in public education. She aimed her attacks squarely at the moral deficiencies of public instruction. The character of the education that has been current in the world cannot stand the test of the Word of God. The molding and fashioning of minds should not be left to men who have not comprehended the importance of the preparation for that life which measures with the life of God. Public education would someday produce a harvest of woe that would weaken the moral fabric of the nation, she said. In sending children to the public schools, parents are placing them under demoralizing influences, influences that injure the morals and habits. In such surroundings, children often receive instruction that trains them to be enemies of Christ. They lose sight of piety and virtue. Amazingly, she took the personal risk of questioning the most cherished principles of the new education. She wrote, "Philosophical speculation and scientific research in which God is not acknowledged are making skeptics of thousands. In the schools of today, the conclusions that learned men have reached as the result of their scientific investigations are carefully taught and explained, while the impression is distinctly given that if these learned men are correct, the Bible cannot be. Skepticism is attractive to the human mind. The youth see in it an independence that captivates the imagination, and they are deceived." During the late 1960s and early 1970s, the eyes of the world were drawn to a strange spectacle on the campuses of North American universities. Students, some under the influence of drugs, ransacked the landscapes of their schools. Preaching pacifism, they endorsed some of the most violent spectacles ever seen in American democracy. While a great deal of public sympathy was extended to the campus demonstrators, the new focus on educational institutions began to show some alarming trends, and people began to ask some pointed questions. How was it possible, some asked, that students could maintain high grades in college while skipping classes, organizing campus unrest, and showing no concern for academic excellence? Answers soon began to come. Results of studies which showed inflated grading systems, a general academic decline, and little of any corrective action being taken to halt the skid. It was suddenly discovered that millions of high school students were graduating each year without the effective ability to read and write. But these reports, startling as they seemed, carried none of the numbing impact of the 1983 published report titled "A Nation at Risk." Not only were the children not learning, the whole nation was in danger. Not only college students, but high school and grade school pupils, the entire program, said the report, was beset by a cancer of mediocrity. Said the report, if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. This was no propaganda tool developed by enemies of public education. There was no hidden agenda in this federal government document. Its message was clear. We report to the American people that while we can take justifiable pride in what our schools and colleges have historically accomplished and contributed to the United States and the well-being of its people, the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. In a special paragraph to parents, the report says, "You know that you cannot confidently launch your children into today's world unless they are of strong character and well educated in the use of language, science, and mathematics. They must possess a deep respect for intelligence, achievement, and learning, and the skills needed to use them. You have the right to demand for your children the best our schools and colleges can provide. Here, the report for the first time hints at yet another failure of the system. It just doesn't seem to be helping students to become better people. Perhaps it isn't a simple case of having let quality slip. Maybe there's something more serious wrong. Another study published in November 1984 makes it clear that the problem does run deeper. It's just not that simple, says the report, Developing Character, Transmitting Knowledge. Put together by a panel of well-known American educators, it says, it is often proposed that schools can develop good character in their students if they stress academic learning and discipline. But this is not so. As researchers have observed, pupils attend schools for about 15,000 hours of their lives. It's their most important away-from-home experience during childhood and adolescence. This report shows that not only have young people not been learning well, but they've not been learning their moral lessons either. Findings show, for example, that since 1940, the rates of out-of-wedlock births to white females between the ages 15 to 19 have increased 800%. The rate of death by homicide for white males ages 15 to 24 have increased 315% from 1955 to 1981. These measures of youth disorder have increased far more quickly than the similar adult measures. And those who studied the problem feel that some of the blame should be placed at the doorstep of public education. One cause for the high level of youth disorders is the unsound policy of many schools to ignore character development and the formation of cooperative attitudes and skills in pupils. Ah, but you may say, parents are responsible for the moral education of their children. Schools should stick to the basics of academic learning. Public education should be morally neutral. The problem is that moral neutrality is impossible, and perceptive public educators understand the hollowness of such reasoning. Even an accomplished actor could not, during the thousands of hours he might spend in the classroom with students, hide his real feelings on the rightness and wrongness of certain attitudes. And what are some of these attitudes? A survey taken recently asked public educators about their personal beliefs. The same survey was also given to a random group of American adults. What did the researchers discover? Quite frankly, they found that the philosophy of John Dewey still runs clear and strong through the public education ranks. While the survey showed, for example, that in the general public, 73% of those surveyed frequently feel that God loves them. Among public educators, only 40% feel such impulses. But when asked if they had ever made a personal commitment to Christianity, only 20% say they have, while 47% of the general public claims to have done so. Should young people engage in sexual activity before the age of 16? Predictably, 71% of American adults say no. But among public educators, fewer than half think it really matters one way or another. The survey asked about abortion. Few public educators find it morally wrong, and only 20% find homosexuality to be an ethical problem. 52% of the general public surveyed feel that marriages should be made more difficult to dissolve. Only 19% of the public teachers. And should we really blame them? For nearly 100 years now, this philosophy has been built into the system, and we can expect that a high percentage of these teachers believe the things they've learned during their training. How well this quotation from the January-February 1983 issue of the Humanist magazine sums up the conflict. The battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity and the new faith of humanism. There's a vehemence about such words, despite the fact that good warriors rarely battle rotting corpses. And it's equally true that not all teachers are locked in perfect step with the humanist drumbeat. But in this time of public education turmoil, teachers are searching for a foundation on which to build, for a rock and creed upon which to base their decisions, and they're becoming evangelists of a new faith. Your children may be their intended converts.
Now you've seen some of the most striking differences between the two systems. And that's why we have two systems. And that's why I, as a pastor, spend part of my time supporting our church school and our academy.
Oh, I've seen some new things, and I think we've seen some real startling things. But I still have another question of you.
Sure.
Is there really that much difference between Christian schools and public schools? We hear so often about how our church schools are conforming to the world.
You know, we're hearing that all the time.
Well, if you're asking about academics, yes, the Adventist system does conform. But the achievement records show that the church school student is doing much better than the public school student. But there's more to church school than academics. I'd like to show you some exciting things that are taking place today on our school campuses. And perhaps after we've seen this video, I can ask you the question, is there a difference?
Fair enough.
From most outward appearances, life in an Adventist school seems pretty much the same as it does in a public school. There's singing, good singing. There's arithmetic. You'll find language arts and social studies. And of course, manual arts. No one argues that Adventist schools teach the basics well. Scholastic achievement tests leave little doubt. Students in Adventist schools learn more and learn it faster than do those who attend the public schools.
Adventist schools teach the basics well. There's no question about it. Achievement tests, such as the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, help us tell the story. On these tests, the national average is 50%. If our students were doing only average work, we'd expect them to rank in the 50% range. But no, for the 164 Adventist schools in the Pacific Northwest, students in the elementary grades rank at the 81 percentile. Academy students rank even higher at 85%. We believe in a strong academic program, and we feel that our spiritual emphasis in the classroom only helps make our students more diligent in their academic work. Adventist school children are doing well, very well.
And while by secular standards these measurements may be the most important, there's something more. Something that only a former public educator can really appreciate and define. Paul Campanella once taught at the University of Montana. He taught courses in semantics and speech pathology and audiology. Today, though, he teaches history, music, and counsels students at the Meadow Glades Seventh-day Adventist School near Vancouver, Washington. It's been quite a switch.
A private parochial setting after being in public school is something of a shock to the system, particularly when grades, a hardcore curriculum of academics is the complete ballpark in public education. When you talk to young people about their problems, not only academic problems, but personal problems, there was always a frustration that seemed to enter the counseling area because you could not let them know who the great physician was, who had all of the answers. These people would come to you in a counseling situation asking for answers that you knew Christ had, that you didn't have, but you did not feel free to give them that information.
Working in the public school system, Paul Campanella couldn't introduce his students to the great physician. He was legally bound to a totally secular, non-sectarian curriculum. But now, as he teaches students such as these in a Christian school, he urges them to achieve. He encourages them to excel. He looks for the very best teaching and psychological methods to imprint information on young minds. But there's an added dimension, an underlying philosophy, as he says, that all of the knowledge that we gain academically goes for naught unless it has benefits for somebody else. When it comes to hands-on experience, Adventist schools have no rival. Today, the Evergreen Valley School has been transformed, at least a part of it has been changed, into the Evergreen Valley Bakery. Now, you might say, what a great experience, what a worthwhile project. to teach youngsters how to make whole wheat rolls as part of their training. A former baker, who also happens to be a certified teacher, donates his time to work with the children. Yes, it's a real benefit to the students, a welcome change of pace, a practical lesson in industry. But for these students, it's a lot more, because these still warm rolls are just another of, so many ways these students share their blessings with others. Early in the afternoon, the students travel to the home of 2 senior citizens to encourage them, to sing for them, to pray with them. And yes, you guessed it, the fresh rolls find their way from the loving hands of those who bake them to the grateful ones of those who need encouragement. It's another way of making sure that the point comes through clearly. Unless we're studying and working to benefit others, our instruction, even our Bible classes, become a worthless and futile exercise in selfishness. Students in Adventist schools are taught skills in the arts and in interpersonal skills, not as a way to riches, fame, prestige, and self-satisfaction, but as a way to reach the world with the greater values of life. That's one reason it's so important that the local pastor be involved with the church outreach program, to show in word and example the spirit of sharing that lies at the roots of Christian education. It's a scene that could never happen in public education, yet it must happen here, and it must be practiced. These students are conducting a religious survey with the help of a local church member who has volunteered to help in this outreach. The students indeed are learning to put their physical, mental, spiritual, and social knowledge to work for others. It's amazing that these school children often lead the way in their local churches in giving Bible studies. Bible studies under the supervision of their teachers, true, but Bible studies that not only teach the students how to share their faith, but bring baptisms as well. This is an actual Bible study taking place near Olympia, Washington. No one ever promised that making Christian education work would be an easy task. And a look at some of the industries in which Academy students are working these days gives an idea of what it often takes to make Christian education affordable. The site is Upper Columbia Academy, a boarding secondary school of some 300 students south of Spokane, Washington. Students at UCA earn tuition money while they learn. The past decade of recessions has made finances a real problem to many families, especially to those with several children enrolled in school. That's one reason that Upper Columbia has put forth extraordinary effort to recruit and retain campus industries. Recently, with the help of a generous alumnus of Upper Columbia Academy, a clothing factory opened on campus. The students here are currently sewing uniforms for the Pathfinder Clubs of North America, for which the plant has a contract. Harris Junior Academy of Pendleton, Oregon is an example of this generosity at work. Make no mistake about it, Pendleton, Oregon is cowboy country. It's not a wealthy town, and the local church members aren't particularly well-to-do, except that a good share of them probably own horses and wear cowboy boots. But the church and the school definitely have their spurs pointed the right direction when it comes to Christian education. We asked the principal, Rudy Rittenbach, how the school makes allowances for those who wish to attend but appear unable to meet the expenses.
Here in Pendleton, our basic philosophy with worthy students is that every child that's associated with Adventism is entitled to a Christian education, whether his parents can afford it or not. And we have provided funds through the church, through a Worthy Student Fund, to help meet these needs. We have, right at the present, about 46% of our student population here receives Worthy Student Aid in one form or another, whether it be a small percentage of the tuition or a total amount of the tuition, depending upon the parent's ability to pay. We find that by keeping these children in church school, they're more likely to be involved in the other church activities, such as Pathfinders, the recreation that we have here at school in the evenings, and all these other types of activities that keep them linked with the church and the Adventist philosophy. So we look at this as our mission to provide education. This is our missionary project here to these students that want to come to our school. At the present time, 95% of the students in the church are enrolled at Harris Junior Academy and receiving a Christian education.
Surely there's a lesson to be learned here in this western town, and perhaps it's this, that to teach others to give, one must give of himself. To teach caring and concern for others, one must himself show that same caring. Wendell Calkins is a senior at Laurelwood Adventist Academy near Portland, Oregon. His may be the school's final graduating class, for the local conference is consolidating its boarding school program. It's not a distinction Wendell is happy about, yet he feels that God still directs the Christian education program. He also feels that God has been present, always present, in the classrooms. For this 4-point, college-bound engineering student, it's quite a confession, and he feels that some of the highlights of his academy life have occurred when he prayed.
Something neat that has happened these last couple of years that I think has really drawn the school together. Last year, when I was in the junior class, Kari Felkley had Hodgkin's disease, which was cancer, and she had to leave, after the first quarter of school and go down to California to Stanford University for treatments. And so when she did that, a lot of us felt like, we really missed her a lot, and so a real start became to try to, let's help Kari out, let's try to make her still feel wanted. And so we sent her all kinds of letters, and immediately after that, they started ringing the bell 4 times a day, and every time the bell rang, we'd all stop wherever we were on campus. I mean, even if we were coming from the mill, working, or in class, wherever, we'd just stop right there and have a prayer and say, Lord, we want you to take care of Kari.
And their prayers were answered. These are the kinds of experiences Christian education is engraving on the hearts of young Christians throughout the nation. And as the controversy in public education swirls, it's time to thank God, perhaps, that Adventist education remains different. Different to the core. It's a system still anchored to its moorings and to a belief that says that in serving God and others, one finds a meaning for knowledge, wisdom, and achievement. A meaning now and through eternity.
We see the difference. I mean, you can sense it. I'm not putting down the public school system or the teachers. They have a system and they're legally obligated to it. But we Christians need something different. A place where the Christian philosophy is seen every minute of every day while the children are developing.
Earlier this evening, you mentioned that you were having difficulties meeting the tuition expenses for your children. And I've been wondering, how would it be if the church would help you with those expenses?
Well, that's nice. That's a fantastic gesture, and we appreciate it very much. But I know people with much less income than we that are putting their children through church school. Oh, I've always wondered why they did it or how they did it, I mean. It's just, well, before I saw this film, well, I just didn't understand.
Pastor, I think what my husband is trying to say is that we would like to be among those people who are willing to go without in order to put first things first.
Yeah. We want to keep our girls in church school. We really do. Pastor, if you'll excuse us, we'd like to get home and tell the girls before it's too late. Pastor Rebecca.
By all means. And thanks so much for stopping by. I hope I've been of some help to both of you for this.
You have, Pastor. You and your programs. Thanks very much for being here when we needed to talk.
Absolutely.
Thank
You're really welcome.
Good night.
Good night now.
Are they asleep?
Myra is, but Sarah's still saying her prayers.
Do you need a ride home?
No, I have someone coming. I'll just get my things.
Great, thank you.
Really, Jesus, I do want to go to church school, but I don't want my sister to go to public school. She still needs to learn much more about you. So please, Jesus, if there's a job I can get to earn some money, I'll do it, Jesus. Really, I will.
Yes, Jesus, thank you so much for a family who can pray together like this. And thank you, Jesus, for answering Sarah's prayer. And thank you for a school worth praying about. Father, thank you especially for this school and where our children, both daughters, will be going next year.
Amen.
Oh, Daddy, we're really going back to church school? Oh.
Yep, you're stuck with it for another year.
Oh, Daddy! Oh, I said that too loud. But we really should tell her, don't you think? Let's go wake her.